The highway had become a rumor. Two pale, reflective lines, barely visible beneath the rolling curtain of white, were all that remained of Route 9, and Claire Donnelly gripped the wheel of her aging Subaru with both hands, leaning forward as if those extra 3 inches might help her see through the blizzard. Then something moved at the shoulder. Not the wind, not a mailbox post shaking loose. A hand, bare fingers, curled upward from a snowbank like a pale root reaching for sun. Claire's foot found the brake, and the car slid 6 feet before stopping at an angle. She sat for 2 seconds, wipers slapping, breath fogging. Common sense said to call 911 and wait. But she'd worked respiratory therapy for 9 years. She knew what cold did to lungs, and she knew how long an ambulance took on a night like this. She pulled her hood up, shoved the door open against the wind, and fought her way to the shape on the shoulder. He was big, well over 6 feet, with a heavy leather jacket crusted in ice and a face the color of raw dough. A touring motorcycle, some massive cruiser, lay on its side behind him, front wheel locked at an ugly angle against a guardrail post. No helmet, probably blown off or never worn. His lips were blue-gray. When she pressed 2 fingers below his jaw, the pulse was there but sluggish, like a clock winding down. "Hey." She slapped his cheek, hard. "Hey, can you hear me?" A groan. His eyelids flickered. Good enough. Claire was not a large woman, 128 pounds, most of it stubborn determination, but she'd moved unconscious patients onto gurneys plenty of times. She hooked her arms beneath his and dragged. The snow helped. He slid. It took her 4 agonizing minutes to get him into the back seat of the Subaru, and by the end her scrub top was soaked through and her lower back screamed. She cranked the heat to maximum and pointed every vent rearward. Her house was 7 minutes away on a clear night. Tonight it took 22, the car crawling through drifts that scraped the undercarriage like frozen hands. Getting him inside was worse. She managed it only because the man surfaced enough to put one boot in front of the other when she shouted instructions into his ear. Through the garage, across the kitchen, into the spare room where her daughter's old crib used to be. She stripped the frozen jacket off him. Hell's Angels, the patch red, with a chapter rocker she didn't stop to identify. Wrapped him in the emergency Mylar blanket from her go bag, then layered 2 quilts on top. She filled hot water bottles, tucked them at his core, and monitored his breathing until it deepened into something close to normal sleep. By then it was past 1 in the morning. Claire sat on the hallway floor, back against the wall, and allowed herself to shake. Her daughter, Lily, was safe at Claire's sister's house tonight, a small mercy. The stranger in the spare room filled the doorframe, even lying down. The winged death's head patch on his jacket stared at her from the kitchen chair where she draped it to dry. She could call someone. The police, maybe. But the man hadn't threatened her. He'd been dying. You don't leave a dying man on the road and sleep well after. At 6:43 a.m., pale light crept through the blinds, and Claire woke to 2 sounds. The stranger coughing in the spare room, and her phone vibrating with a notification from Pinnacle Loan Services. She opened it out of habit, expecting the usual automated statement. It was not a statement. It was a final notice of default, 72 hours to pay $14,211.07 in accumulated late fees and penalties, or foreclosure proceedings would commence. Her hands went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. She was still staring at the screen when a rough voice came from the spare room doorway. The stranger stood there, blanket around his shoulders like a shawl, gray hair matted, deep-set eyes scanning the kitchen with the quiet alertness of a man accustomed to cataloging exits. "Ma'am," he said. His voice sounded like gravel poured slowly into a bucket. "I believe you saved my life." Claire locked her phone. "You were hypothermic. Core temp was probably below 92. You need fluids and rest." He nodded once. Then his gaze caught the Pinnacle Loan Services letterhead still visible on her screen's lock screen notification. Something shifted behind his eyes, recognition, cold and precise. "Pinnacle," he said. "Not a question. You know them?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then, they're why I was on that road." Before Claire could respond, a sound rose from outside, low and distant, then louder, unmistakable even through the muffled world of fresh snow. Engines. Not 1 or 2, but a convoy's worth, rumbling at low speed down her residential street. She went to the front window and pulled the curtain aside. Through the glare of white, she counted them. 16, 18, 20 machines, some in trucks, some on bikes rolling slow over the plowed center lane, all wearing the same patch as the man behind her. That'd be my chapter, Silas said quietly. They'll have been looking for me since midnight. Claire let the curtain fall. She turned to face him, phone still in her hand, final notice still burning behind the glass. Before I open that door, she said, I need to know exactly what Pinnacle did to you, and I need to decide if I want any part of what comes next. Silas, he told her his road name was North, but his given name was Silas Keene, 57 years old, sat at her kitchen table with a mug of black coffee wrapped in both hands. The color was coming back to his face in uneven patches, and he still trembled occasionally, aftershocks from a body remembering how close it had come. Claire sat across from him. She'd let two of his brothers in, a wiry man named Garrett who seemed to function as a sergeant-at-arms, and a younger rider called Pike, who'd brought a medical kit from their truck. The rest waited outside in their vehicles, engines idling, patient as wolves. I'm the chapter's financial oversight, Silas said. 6 months ago, one of our prospects' wives lost her house. Story didn't add up. She'd been making payments, had the bank receipts. I started pulling threads. He paused, sipped coffee, and winced at the heat. Pinnacle Loan Services. They buy distressed mortgages, then they run a game. Phantom late fees, misapplied payments, inflated escrow charges. By the time the homeowner notices, the balance has ballooned past what they can cover. Then Pinnacle offers a rescue refinance at criminal interest. You sign or you lose the roof. Claire felt something tighten in her chest. She'd been making payments. Never missed one. Not once. Not even the month after Lily's father left. She'd set up automatic transfers specifically so nothing could slip. Show me your notice again, Silas said. She hesitated. This was a stranger, a biker with a felony-adjacent reputation and a patch that made most people cross the street. But he was also a man who'd nearly frozen to death on a road that led to the same company threatening her home. She unlocked her phone and slid it across the table. Silas read the notice carefully, lips moving slightly. Then he pointed. This code, PSC 4412. That's not a standard Fannie Mae servicer code. That's Pinnacle's internal routing. It means your loan was transferred to their special collections division, probably 6 to 8 months ago, without proper notification to you. I never got a transfer notice, Claire said. My payments have gone to the same account number for 3 years. Exactly. They keep the old account open as a pass-through, skim what they want, then claim you're short. You've been paying. They've been pocketing the difference and logging penalties on the unpaid portion. He set the phone down. I've seen it 4 times now. Same code. Same pattern. Claire pulled her laptop from the counter and opened her banking portal. She had 37 months of automatic payment records, every one showing the correct amount withdrawn on the first of the month. This is my proof, she said. Every payment, timestamp. That's your proof you paid, Silas agreed. But we need Pinnacle's ledger to show where the money went after it left your account. And that's what I was carrying when my bike went down. He looked toward the spare room where his jacket hung. Inside pocket. Waterproof case. A USB drive with 8 months of internal audit data. Claire stared at him. How did you get internal audit data from a company you don't work for? I hired a forensic accountant. Licensed, legitimate. She filed public records requests and used the state's mortgage fraud disclosure statute to compel production. It's legal, it's just slow. The data arrived yesterday afternoon. I was writing to our chapter attorney when the storm hit. Garrett spoke for the first time, his voice like dry leather. North didn't check in at midnight. We rolled search parties at 2 a.m., tracked his phone's last ping to this stretch of 9. Claire looked at the window. Outside, the Hells Angels waited in the cold. Engines ticked and rumbled. These were not men who waited easily, yet they were doing it. For her decision, she realized. I need to verify this myself, she said. I'm not signing anything. I'm not accepting money, and I'm not letting anyone act on my behalf without my understanding exactly what's happening. Silas nodded. No argument, no persuasion. Just a nod. We have a lawyer, he said. Jenna Cole. Housing law legal aid. She's been building the case for the prospect's wife. If you're willing, I'd like her to look at your records alongside the audit data. Everything transparent. Everything in your name. Claire was quiet for a long moment. The heater clicked on, and warm air pushed through the vents. She thought about Lily's bedroom down the hall, the one with the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, and the letter that said she had 72 hours. Call your lawyer, Claire said. But this stays legal. Every step. I catch a whiff of anything that puts me or my daughter at risk, and I walk away. Silas picked up his phone with still unsteady hands. Understood. Outside, Garrett raised a hand. A signal, and the idling engines dropped to silence, one by one. The angels would wait. But something else nagged at Claire as she watched Silas dial. The 72-hour notice had arrived this morning, during the worst storm of the decade. No mail carrier had come. No courier. The notification had been digital, pushed at exactly 6:43 a.m. As if someone at Pinnacle knew the roads were impassable and chose that precise moment to start a clock that couldn't be answered in time. She pulled up the email header on her phone and studied the timestamp, the server routing. A chill moved through her that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Silas, she said. The notice. It was sent during the storm. On purpose. He paused mid-dial and looked at her. Something like grim respect settled into the lines of his face. Yeah, he said. That's how they operate. The clock starts when you can't move. He finished dialing. Jenna? It's North. We've got another one. And this one figured it out on her own. Jenna Cole's office occupied the second floor of a converted hardware store on Oak Street, the kind of space where the radiators clanged like prisoners and the filing cabinets outnumbered the chairs. Claire sat at the conference table with her laptop open, 37 months of bank statements printed and arranged in chronological order. She'd organized them herself at 5 that morning, unable to sleep, and she'd found something that made her stomach drop. Jenna, 42, sharp-featured, with reading glasses perpetually pushed atop her head, spread the statements across the table like a dealer laying cards. Walk me through it, Jenna said. Claire pointed. Here, month 1 through month 24. My automatic payment is $1,847. Every month, debited on the 1st, posted to the same routing number. Normal. But here, she slid a finger to month 25. The routing number changes. Not the account number. The routing number. I didn't catch it because the total amount stayed the same and my bank showed Pinnacle Loan Services as the payee. I had no reason to check. When did the fees start appearing? Month 26. Claire pulled up a separate printout, Pinnacle's own statement, which she'd downloaded from their borrower portal. See? They show my payment as $1,647 starting in month 25. $200 less than what I actually paid. And then they charge a $75 late fee for the missing $200, plus a $45 administrative processing fee. Every single month. Jenna took off her glasses and pressed them flat on the table. 13 months of phantom shortfalls. That's $2,600 in diverted principal, plus $1,560 in fabricated fees, compounding monthly. She looked at Silas, who stood by the window with his arms crossed. Pull up the audit. Silas inserted the USB drive into Jenna's secure laptop, an air-gapped machine she used for sensitive documents. The forensic accountant's report filled the screen, transaction logs, internal memos, routing confirmations. Here, Silas said, leaning over to scroll. Pinnacle's internal ledger for Claire's loan. They received the full $1,847 every month. But they split it, $1,647 posted to the loan, $200 routed to a holding account labeled escrow surplus. That surplus account doesn't pay out to any tax authority or insurance company. It just sits, earns interest, gets swept into their operating fund quarterly. Claire felt the room tilt slightly. All those months of believing she was secure. All those nights working 12-hour shifts in the respiratory unit, telling herself that at least the house was handled, at least that one thing was stable. It's not just me, she said quietly. No, Jenna confirmed. We've identified 11 borrowers in this county alone. Same code, PSC 4412. Same routing change around the same period. Someone at Pinnacle ran a batch update on a group of accounts, likely hoping no one would notice until the arrears were large enough to force refinancing. Martinvale, Silas said. The name came out flat, without heat, which somehow made it colder. Regional manager. He approved the batch transfer. His digital signature is on the internal authorization, page 47 of the audit. Claire looked at the document. There it was, Martinvale, Regional Account Manager, Pinnacle Loan Services. Authorization to reclassify selected accounts under special collections effective 14 months ago. She sat back in her chair. The scope of it was settling in now. Not just her house, but 11 families. Maybe more. This wasn't a clerical error she could resolve with a phone call. This was engineered theft, slow and quiet, designed to look like the borrower's fault. What are my options? She asked. Not what can you do. What are my options? She needed to own this. Jenna laid it out clearly. First option, file an individual complaint with the state banking regulator and wait 8 to 12 weeks for investigation. The problem was time. Claire's 72-hour notice would expire long before any regulator acted. Second option, pursue an emergency temporary restraining order in county court, presenting the audit data as evidence that the foreclosure was based on fraudulent accounting. This could freeze Pinnacle's action within 24 to 48 hours, if a judge found the evidence compelling. Third option, and here Jenna paused, glancing at Silas. The Hells Angels Mutual Aid Fund could pay off the claimed balance immediately, stopping foreclosure, and then pursue recovery of the fraudulent fees through litigation afterward. No, Claire said before Jenna finished the sentence. I'm not taking a bag of money from a motorcycle club to pay a debt I don't actually owe. That doesn't solve anything. It just moves the debt from Pinnacle's books to a different ledger. Silas didn't argue. He didn't even shift his weight. He just watched her with those gray, cataloging eyes. What if it's not a bag of money? Jenna said carefully. What if the fund pays only the court-verified legitimate balance, the amount you'd actually owe after the fraudulent fees are removed, and does so through the court itself, as part of a structured resolution? Claire considered this. What's the legitimate balance? Jenna pulled up a calculator, cross-referencing Claire's actual payment history with the loan's original amortization schedule. Her fingers moved quickly. Based on 37 months of verified payments at $1,847. Your actual remaining principal balance should be approximately $6,340, not $14,006. The number hung in the air. Claire had been told she owed more than double what she actually did. If a court confirms that 6,000 figure, Claire said slowly, and the payment comes from a verified, audited source with no strings attached, no membership, no obligation, no debt I can't explain to a bank examiner, then I'll consider it. That's exactly how the fund works, Silas said. Audited annually. Transparent disbursements. We've used it before. Funerals, medical bills, housing emergencies. Every dollar accounted for. Claire nodded, but her jaw was set. Then we do it the second way first. Restraining order. Stop the clock. And then we settle the real number in daylight, where everyone can see. Jenna smiled. A quick, sharp thing, like a blade catching light. I'll draft the motion tonight. But I need you in court tomorrow morning to sign the affidavit and present your records in person. The judge will want to hear from the borrower, not just the attorney. I'll be there. Outside, the sun was cutting through the post-storm haze, turning the snow into a field of crushed diamonds. Claire gathered her documents, tapped each stack square, and slid them into a folder she'd labeled in her own handwriting, proof. As they walked to the parking lot, Silas fell into step beside her. His limp was better today, frostbitten feet recovering in good boots. You didn't flinch in there, he said. I can't afford to flinch. I have a daughter who needs a home. He nodded. They reached her car. Before she got in, she turned back. Silas, if this Martin Vale finds out about the audit data, if he knows you were carrying it when you crashed, he's going to try something before that court date. You know that. I know. The older man's expression didn't change. That's why 8 of my brothers are parked outside your house right now. Not as enforcers. As witnesses. If anything happens, if anyone shows up, there'll be 16 eyes and a dashcam on every second of it. Claire studied his face. There was no bluster there. No posturing. Just the steady calm of a man who'd spent decades understanding that presence was its own form of power. Witnesses, she repeated. Witnesses, he confirmed. Nothing more. She got in her car and drove home through streets that sparkled with ice and sunlight, her folder of proof on the passenger seat beside her. The Hells Angels chapter house sat behind a chain-link fence on the industrial edge of Milford, a squat cinder-block building with a corrugated roof and a parking area that could hold 40 bikes. Today it held mostly trucks and SUVs, the snow too deep for anything on 2 wheels. Inside, the meeting room smelled of coffee and old leather. A long table dominated the center, scarred with decades of use. Claire had not expected to be here. She had not expected to be sitting at this table with Jenna Cole on one side and a dozen weathered men ranged around the room. But life had been revising her expectations aggressively for the past 36 hours. Silas stood at the head of the table, the USB drive connected to a projector that threw columns of numbers onto the far wall. Fund balance, as of this morning, $87,420, he said. Audited quarterly by an independent CPA. Last audit was 11 weeks ago, clean. Every disbursement requires a 2/3 chapter vote, a verified purpose, and a paper trail that goes to the accountant. So if we vote to cover Claire's legitimate balance, Garrett said from his chair, the 6340 goes out as a housing emergency disbursement. Standard form. Receipted through the court. Correct. But, Silas held up a hand. We can't vote until we have a court-confirmed number. And we don't have that until the hearing tomorrow. So today, the question is, what does Pinnacle do when they realize we have the audit? Jenna spoke. I filed the TRO motion electronically at 9 this morning. Pinnacle's legal department will have been served by now. They know we're coming. Which means Martinvale knows, Claire said. She'd been thinking about this all night, turning it over like a stone in her hand, looking for the sharp edge. And if he's been running this scheme for over a year across 11 accounts, he's not going to just sit in his office and wait for a judge to freeze everything. What can he actually do? Pike asked from the corner. Jenna leaned forward. Legally, he can accelerate the foreclosure timeline by claiming the property is at risk of damage or abandonment. That triggers a different statute, allows the servicer to secure the property without waiting for court. In practice, that means sending a lockout crew to change the locks. The room went quiet. Can he do that while a TRO is pending? Garrett asked. The TRO isn't granted yet, Jenna said. It's filed. The hearing is at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Between now and then, technically, Pinnacle's original 72-hour notice is still ticking. If they send a crew before the court opens, they get in, change the locks, photograph the abandoned property, and file it as a completed security action, Silas finished. By the time the judge grants the TRO, they'll argue the action was already taken in good faith. Claire felt anger build behind her sternum, hot and tight, like a breath she couldn't release. All those payments, all those nights, and now some man in a regional office was going to send a locksmith to her door at dawn because a blizzard had given him the cover he needed. We check it, she said. The room turned to her. Right now? If he's going to send a crew, there'll be a work order. Locksmiths don't just show up. They need authorization, scheduling, a property address. Someone books them. Jenna raised her eyebrows. You want to call locksmiths? There are 3 commercial lockout services in this county that handle property management accounts. I know because my neighbor got locked out of her own rental last year by a bad landlord and called every one of them. I still have the numbers. Claire pulled out her phone. I'll call each one and ask if they have a service order for my address. As the homeowner, I'm entitled to know if someone's scheduled access to my property. Silas watched her with something that might have been approval, though his face gave away little. Claire called. The first company, All Key Services, said no, nothing on file. The second, Tri-County Lock Bolt, put her on hold for 3 minutes, then came back with a careful voice. Ma'am, I'm not authorized to discuss client work orders over the phone. That's a yes, Claire said, after she hung up. They wouldn't refuse to deny it unless they had something to protect. Jenna was already typing. I'll subpoena Tri-County's dispatch records as part of the TRO motion. But that won't help if they show up at 6 a.m. What time does the court open? Claire asked. Doors at 8:30. Judge takes the bench at 9. So between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m., my house is unprotected by any court order, and a lockout crew might be authorized to show up and change my locks. The silence in the room was heavy, not uncomfortable, but weighted with calculation. 16 men and 2 women thinking the same thought. We'll be there, Garrett said simply. As witnesses, Silas added, before Claire could object. On the street. On public property. Cameras rolling. Not blocking anyone. Not threatening anyone. Just present. Watching. If a lockout crew shows up, we document everything. Timestamps, badge numbers, company vehicle plates. And Jenna takes that documentation straight to the judge at 9. Claire looked at Jenna. Is that legal? Citizens observing activity on a public street and recording it? Entirely legal. First Amendment. As long as they don't impede, threaten, or interfere with anyone performing lawful work, and as long as they stay off private property unless invited. And if the crew tries to change my locks while I'm standing in my own home, then you're a homeowner in lawful possession of your property, and they cannot remove you without a sheriff and a court order, which they don't have. They have a servicer's self-authorized work ticket. That's not the same thing. Claire breathed. In, out. The room waited. Fine, she said. Here's how this works. I stay home tonight. I stay in my house. When the lockout crew comes, if they come, I answer the door. I ask for their authorization paperwork. I photograph everything. Your people. She looked at Garrett, at Silas, at the row of silent men along the wall. Stay on the street. You record. You do not touch anyone. You do not threaten anyone. You do not give Pinnacle any reason to claim I'm being supported by criminal intimidation. Clear. Clear, Silas said. Clear, Garrett echoed. And then Jenna walks into that courthouse at 9 with everything we've documented. And the judge sees exactly what kind of company Pinnacle is. Jenna closed her laptop and nodded. I'll be at your house at 5:30 a.m. If they come early, I want to be present as your legal counsel. Good. Claire stood. The men around the room shifted, not standing, not saluting, but acknowledging. A subtle straightening of shoulders. She wasn't their president or their member. She was something else. A woman who'd decided to fight on terms she could live with, and who'd told them exactly where the lines were. As she walked toward the door, Silas followed her into the hallway. Claire. She turned. That call you made, to the locksmith company. That was sharp. Sharper than most of the investigators I've worked with. I'm a respiratory therapist, she said. I notice when something isn't breathing right. And this whole situation stopped breathing a long time ago. He almost smiled. The corner of his mouth twitched, the most emotion she'd seen from him yet. 5:30, he said. 5:30, she confirmed, and walked out into the cold. 5:18 a.m. Claire Street was black and white. Black sky, white snow, the yellow cones of her porch light marking the boundary between her world and whatever was coming. She'd been awake since 4, pacing, checking her phone, reviewing documents. The coffee in her thermos was already lukewarm. At 5:22, headlights appeared at the end of the block. Jenna's sedan, recognizable by the dented rear panel. The lawyer parked in Claire's driveway, walked to the front door, and was let in without a word. Anything? Jenna asked, unwinding her scarf. Nothing yet. They sat in the kitchen. The folder-marked proof lay on the table between them like a loaded weapon. At 5:41, more headlights. Trucks, mostly, the Hells Angels arriving in their winter vehicles. They spread out along the street with the practiced spacing of men who understood sight lines and camera angles. Engines off. Parking lights on. Dashboard cameras running. Garrett's truck sat directly across from Claire's driveway. His window cracked 2 inches despite the cold. 5:50. 6:15. The sky began to lighten at its eastern edge, turning from black to deep blue to a grudging gray. At 6:27, a white van turned onto the street. No company markings, just a plain white panel van with a commercial plate. It slowed as it approached Claire's house, then pulled past and parked 3 houses down. 2 men got out. Heavy coats. Tool bags. One carried a battery-powered drill, the other had a clipboard. Claire's throat tightened. She stood, straightened her spine, and walked to the front door. Wait, Jenna said, joining her. Let them approach. Let them state their business. I'll be right behind you. The 2 men walked up Claire's driveway, boots crunching on cleared concrete. The taller one, early 40s, sandy-haired, checked his clipboard, looked at the house number, and stepped onto the porch. He raised his fist to knock. Claire opened the door before his knuckles fell. Can I help you? She said. The man blinked. He'd expected an empty house. She could see it in his posture, the momentary recalculation behind his eyes. Ma'am, we're with Tri-County Lock and Bolt. We have a work order to resecure this property on behalf of the lien holder. He held up the clipboard. A printed work order, stamped and signed. May I see that, please? Claire extended her hand. He hesitated, then handed it over. Claire photographed it with her phone, front and back, before reading. The work order was dated yesterday. Authorized by Pinnacle Loan Services. Property status listed as vacant/abandoned. This property is not vacant, Claire said. Her voice was steady. I live here. I am the homeowner. I am standing in my own doorway. The shorter man shifted his weight. Ma'am, we just do what the order says. The order says this property is abandoned, Claire repeated. Does it look abandoned to you? Jenna stepped into view behind her. Gentlemen, I'm Jenna Cole, attorney representing Ms. Donnelly. This property is occupied by its legal owner. The authorization you've been given contains a materially false statement that the property is vacant. Proceeding with this work order would constitute unlawful entry into an occupied dwelling. I'm asking you to stand down. The taller man looked at the shorter man. The shorter man looked at the street, at the row of trucks with their cameras and their silent occupants and their patient, unblinking attention. We need to call our dispatcher, the tall one said. Please do, Jenna replied. And please do so from the sidewalk, as you are currently on private property at the invitation of no one. They retreated. The taller man pulled out his phone and turned away, speaking in low tones. Claire stood on her porch, arms crossed against the cold, watching. 3 minutes passed. The man turned back. Dispatcher says to hold pending client confirmation. We're not proceeding. Thank you, Claire said. Before you go, I'd like your names and your company's work order number for my records. Another hesitation. But Jenna was recording on her phone, and Garrett's dash cam was 30 feet away, and the math of the situation was not complicated. Tom Henley, the tall one said. Work order 4417. B. Issued yesterday, January 14th, at 2:15 p.m. Claire wrote it down. January 14th, 2:15 p.m. That was before the storm had even ended, before the plows had come through. Pinnacle had ordered the lockout while the roads were still impassable. Time for the moment between the storm's end and the court's opening. A window of hours when Claire was supposed to be helpless. The van left at 6:43. The locksmith crew drove away without changing a single lock. Claire's hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the adrenaline finally releasing. Jenna put a hand on her shoulder. We have it. Work order date, false vacancy claim. Your presence documented by multiple witnesses and cameras. This is exactly what the judge needs. How long until we get to the courthouse? 20 minutes in clear roads. We leave at 8. We're there by 8:20, and I walk this into the clerk's office the moment the doors open. Claire nodded. She looked out at the street. Garrett raised 2 fingers, a small salute. Silas, in the passenger seat of another truck, inclined his head. They'd done exactly what they promised. They'd watched. They'd recorded. They hadn't threatened, hadn't blocked, hadn't touched. Just presence. Wait. The quiet statement that someone was paying attention. Inside, Claire poured herself fresh coffee and sat at the table with Jenna. Together they organized the final evidence packet. The work order with its impossible date, Claire's photos of the lockout crew, the dashboard footage timestamps, the original 72-hour notice sent during the storm, the 37 months of payment records, and the forensic audit showing Pinnacle's internal diversion of funds. At 7:45, Claire changed into the one blazer she owned, navy blue, bought for job interviews 4 years ago, and gathered her documents into a leather portfolio bag. At 8:02, she drove to the county courthouse with Jenna in the passenger seat. Behind them, at a respectful distance, 2 trucks followed, Silas in one, Garrett in the other. Witnesses, should the judge wish to hear additional testimony. The courthouse was a gray stone building with salt-stained steps and a flagpole that creaked in the wind. Claire walked through the metal detector, signed in at the clerk's window, and sat in the gallery of courtroom 3 with her folder on her lap. At 9:07, Judge Patricia Weiler took the bench and called the matter of Donnelly versus Pinnacle Loan Services, emergency motion for temporary restraining order. Claire stood when Jenna told her to stand. She spoke when Jenna told her to speak. She presented her payment records, pointed to the routing number change she'd discovered herself, and described the lockout crew that had arrived at her occupied home before dawn, carrying a work order that called her property abandoned. Pinnacle's attorney, a young man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone beneath the table, argued that the foreclosure was based on verified account records and that any discrepancies were clerical in nature. Judge Weiler looked at the work order's date. She looked at the storm report. She looked at Claire's 37 months of payments. The motion is granted, the judge said. Pinnacle Loan Services is hereby restrained from taking any foreclosure action, property access action, or account modification with respect to the Donnelly property until further order of this court. A full hearing on the merits is set for, she checked her calendar, February 3rd. Ms. Cole, please submit the forensic accounting data for in-camera review by end of business Friday. Claire exhaled. Jenna squeezed her hand beneath the table. It wasn't over, but the clock had stopped. February came in cold but clear, the kind of winter day where the sky was so blue it hurt to look at, and the snow had compacted into a firm white crust that crunched underfoot with a satisfying precision. The full hearing had lasted 2 days. Judge Weiler had reviewed the forensic audit in detail, called the independent CPA to testify, and invited Claire to walk through her payment records line by line. Martin Vale had appeared under subpoena, a gray-suited man of 49 with a salesman's tan and an increasingly desperate lawyer whispering in his ear. Jenna had been methodical. She'd traced the $200 per month diversion across all 11 accounts. She'd shown the internal memo authorizing the batch reclassification. She'd presented Tri-County Lock and Bolt's dispatch records, obtained via subpoena, showing that Vale had personally called in the lockout order at 2:15 p.m. on January 14th, 3 hours before Claire's 72-hour notice was even sent. He'd ordered the locks changed before he'd even issued the threat. The judge's ruling was 14 pages long. Claire read it twice in Jenna's office, her coffee going cold beside her. The key findings. Pinnacle's claimed balance of $14,211.07 was fraudulent. Claire's legitimate remaining balance, calculated from verified payments and the original loan terms, was $6,340.18. All late fees, administrative charges, and escrow surpluses assessed after the unauthorized routing change were void. Pinnacle was ordered to refund $4,160 in overcharges to Claire, plus statutory interest. Martin Vale was referred to the State Attorney General's office for investigation. The foreclosure was permanently vacated. Claire set the ruling down on Jenna's desk and pressed both palms flat on the surface, breathing. "So my house is mine," she said. "Your house is yours," Jenna confirmed. "And the $6,000, still outstanding as a legitimate debt. That's where the fund comes in, if you still want it." Claire had thought about this for 3 weeks. She'd turned it over from every angle, examined it the way she examined a patient's chart, looking for what didn't add up, what might deteriorate, what she might miss. The Hells Angels Mutual Aid Fund was audited. It was transparent. Disbursements were voted on, documented, and reported. It wasn't a favor. It wasn't a debt. It was a mechanism, built for exactly this kind of crisis. "I want to see the vote," she said. Silas had arranged it. That afternoon, Claire sat in the chapter's meeting room, the same scarred table, the same smell of leather and coffee, and watched 16 men raise their hands to authorize disbursement 2024-003, $6,340.18, housing emergency, payable through the county court to the verified lien holder. Every hand went up. No conditions attached. The chapter secretary wrote it in the ledger with a date and an amount and Claire's name. And then he turned the book so she could see. "It's a grant," Silas said. "Not a loan. The fund doesn't take IOUs." Claire nodded. She'd known, but hearing it mattered. The next morning, she and Jenna walked into First Regional Bank at 10 a.m. The teller, a woman in her 20s who clearly did not process mortgage payoffs often, took the court order, the fund's certified check, and the judge's confirmed balance letter. She typed for several minutes, consulted her supervisor, typed again, and then looked up. "Ms. Donnelly, your mortgage balance is now 0. Claire signed the receipt. The teller stamped it. Jenna witnessed. It was quiet and procedural and utterly without drama. Just numbers on a screen resetting to 0, and a woman walking out of a bank into February sunshine with a folded receipt in her coat pocket. Outside, Silas leaned against the fender of Garrett's truck, arms crossed, watching the street with his habitual patience. He straightened when Claire and Jenna emerged. "Done?" he asked. "Done." Claire held up the receipt. He nodded once, a slow, satisfied dip of his head, like a craftsman acknowledging a joint that fit flush. They stood in the parking lot for a moment, the three of them, with the sun cutting long shadows across the pavement and the distant sound of traffic humming on the highway. No ceremony, no speeches, just the settled weight of a thing completed correctly. "Silas, Claire said. He looked at her. When your bike is repaired, or replaced, or whatever happens to a motorcycle that hits a guardrail in a blizzard, I want you to know that my spare room has a working heater and a door that locks. If you're ever on that stretch of 9 again and the weather turns, you don't sleep in a ditch. The corner of his mouth lifted, that almost smile she'd seen once before. Noted. I mean it. Not as a debt. Not as repayment. Just as, she searched for the word. Neighbors. That's what this is. Neighbors, he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. Then he extended his hand, scarred knuckles, thick fingers, steady as stone. She shook it. Firm. Equal. Jenna checked her watch. I have a meeting at noon, the other 10 accounts. We're filing a joint complaint with the AG's office this week. She looked at Claire. You're welcome to join as a named plaintiff, if you want. There's strength in numbers. I'll think about it, Claire said. And she would, genuinely, carefully, on her own terms. She drove home alone. The road was clear, the salt trucks having done their work, and Route 9 stretched ahead of her with both white lines visible and sharp. When she pulled into her driveway, the house sat in the midday light as if it had never been threatened. The porch with its peeling paint that she'd fix in spring, the window with the glow-in-the-dark stars visible behind the glass, the mailbox with Donnelly stenciled in block letters that she'd painted herself 5 years ago. She let herself in, hung her coat, and stood in the kitchen with the receipt in her hand. The heater clicked on. Warm air moved through the vents. That evening, when her sister dropped Lily off after school, Claire sat on the porch steps and watched her daughter run across the yard, backpack bouncing, boots kicking up fans of packed snow. Mom, did you know there are 27 bones in the human hand? Mrs. Patterson taught us today. Claire caught her at the top of the steps and held on, just for a moment, with her face pressed against the cold, sweet smell of her daughter's hair. 27, Claire said. That's a lot of bones. Are you okay, Mom? Yeah, Bug. I'm okay. She let go and held the door open. Come on. It's cold. Let's go inside. They went in together. The door closed. The porch light came on as the afternoon dimmed, and the house stood as it had always stood, solid, present, belonging to the woman who'd refused to let it be taken. 6 miles south, in a garage bay that smelled of motor oil and cold metal, Silas Keene knelt beside the salvaged remains of his touring bike and assessed the damage with patient hands. The front forks were bent. The fairings were cracked. The fuel line had ruptured in the cold. It would take weeks to rebuild, months, maybe, to ride again. But the engine block was sound. The frame was true. And some things, he'd learned, only needed time and the right hands to be made whole again. He stood, wiped his palms on a shop rag, and closed the garage against the coming dark.